Quantum represents 1.2 billion market opportunity, and it is expected to reach 850 billion in just 15 years by 2040. And so it's no wonder that there's so much interest in this technical and this financial revolution. And it certainly seems like everybody's trying to get a nice piece of this pie. And as Michael said, there are countries' ambitions, there's investment dollars, there's political considerations, and these are all a major factor in determining how this opportunity is going to be sliced up. And, you could say it's the new gold rush, it's the new, oil gusher, it's the new critical rare earth minerals land grab. I mean, this is what's happening out here in quantum, and it's really, really exciting. I think what we've heard so far today and what you saw in our panel description is that this is not just a scientific race, it's a geopolitical one. We see that in all areas of technology. And as you'll soon see from our panelists, one of them is my dear friend, Ivo Daalder, and he has described the need for a Manhattan Project for quantum development. So let me just, before I introduce the panelists, just wrap up by saying we at UL Solutions, we're a leader in testing, inspections, and certification for products globally. And we are well attuned to the way that governments cooperate or need to cooperate in areas like standards developments, scientific breakthroughs, talent, commercialization, and really everything that supports getting new ideas and new innovations to market as quickly as possible, especially when there's emerging technology. The competition is incredibly fierce, and I can just say that every single day, I heard the comment about needing talent. We need this every single day. So I am excited to be here as a moderator, representing both a history that I have on the Chicago Council on Global Affairs Board, as well as the P33 board, and we've got a fantastic panel here. So with that, I'd like to introduce each of them. First, John Feiner. Come on out, John. John is a Carnegie Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. He served 4 years as President Biden's Principal Deputy National Security Advisor, advising the president on foreign policy issues and leading the national security decision-making process and crisis management for the federal government. John was awarded the National Security Medal, which is the president's highest award for contributions to national security. He also served in a range of roles in the administration of President Obama. He was the global head of geopolitical affairs at Warburg Pincus, a private equity firm, and an adjunct senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And before John entered government, he was a foreign and national correspondent for the Washington Post. He spent 18 months in Baghdad covering the Iraq War and embedding with the U.S. Marines during the 2003 invasion. He also covered conflicts in Gaza, Georgia, as well as Israel and Lebanon. He covered the 2004 presidential campaign here in the U.S. and said, though, the highlight of his career was covering the World Series with his beloved Boston Red Sox in 2004. Welcome, John. All right, our next panelist is Kathleen Hicks, and she served as the 35th U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense during the Biden administration. Kathleen was previous Senior Vice President and Director of the International Security Program, at the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She was also the Don Marin Scholar at the Kissinger Center for Global Affairs at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where she's once again affiliated as a senior fellow. Earlier in her career, Kathleen was the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Forces. Kathleen has held positions on the Board of Trustees of the Aerospace Corporation, the Board of Directors of the U.S. Naval Institute, the National Defense Strategy Commission, and the National Commission for the Future of the Army. She is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Our next panelist Our next panelist is Sebastian Wray, who serves as Denmark's quantum diplomat in North America, where he leads Denmark's regional, political, commercial, and academic cooperation on quantum technologies. Now, prior to his current post, he was based in Silicon Valley, where he served as the chief strategy advisor to Denmark's tech ambassador, who has a global mandate to represent Denmark on matters of technology. And in that role, Sebastian led deliberations with big tech on matters such as cybersecurity, data protection, and online freedom. Furthermore, he was involved in creating the bilateral joint statement on quantum between Denmark and the United States. And last but certainly not least is Ivo Daalder, a senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Ivo was president and CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs until earlier this year, and he held that post since 2013. Before joining the council as president, Ivo served as U.S. ambassador to NATO under President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2013. And prior to his appointment to ambassador to NATO, Ivo was a senior fellow in foreign policy studies at the Brookings Institution, specializing in American foreign policy, European security, and transatlantic relations, as well as national security affairs. Before joining Brookings back in 1998, he was an associate professor at the University of Maryland's Public School Policy and a director of research at the Center for International and Security Studies. He also served as director for European Affairs on President Clinton's National Security Council staff from 1995 to 1997. And I'm just going to add, and I know of all the places Ivo has lived in the world, Chicago is his favorite. All right, and then Ivo also has authored 10 books, and you frequently will see him on the news as a leading expert in foreign policy. Now let's let them talk. So I am going to sit and listen to, I'm going to ask each panelist just to open with their thoughts, and I'm going to start with John. John, when you were Deputy National Security Advisor, what were the concerns and the benefits you were seeing in terms of quantum development, and how did you deal with it?
So first of all, thank you. It's great to be here, and a lot of fun to be talking about this topic. I guess where I would start is everything that you heard on the last panel is true, and maybe the most consequential, maybe the most important aspects of what the quantum revolution will bring. But in addition to this incredible opportunity, it is also just a very high stakes competition. And there are economic dimensions to that competition, but the national security implications are sort of at the core of it. So it would probably surprise some people to learn that in addition to a lot of discussion during the 4 years that Joe Biden was president about topics like Ukraine and Gaza and Taiwan and Afghanistan, we spent a significant amount of time thinking about how to put the United States in the most advantageous position possible for technology competition, including at the very top of the list, topics like AI and quantum. We've got huge advantages in that competition. You basically heard about them from the governor about the city of Chicago. We've got a magnet for global talent. We've got the best research institutions on the planet. We've got the most dynamic private sector, but we also have some disadvantages vis-a-vis our primary competitor in this global competition, which I think, as everybody knows, is going to be China. And here, some of the disadvantages are the other side of the coin of the advantages. So China is a closed society, but its authoritarian government allows it to direct resources to areas of priority. We sometimes, as a government, have trouble extracting resources from our Congress or channeling private capital into areas that are of greatest consequence from a national security perspective. And we run the risk, if we're not careful, of undermining some of the advantages that I just described, in particular, some of the challenges going on today with research institutions, funding for research and development from the federal government, and attracting the best talent from around the world to the United States. So again, I think the core role of the national security part of the government is to put the United States in the most advantageous position we can be in. The last piece of that, obviously, and it's great that we've got foreign counterparts here as well, is going to be working together with our closest partners and allies around the world. That's one advantage the United States has that China doesn't.
All right, we're going to come back to some of that. But Kathleen, We know we're going to get a great insight from you tomorrow on a panel that's defense industry focused. But give us an overview. Give us a little teaser of how you approached quantum technology when you were in the Department of Defense. And what were some of the top concerns and top opportunities that you saw with quantum?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. And I'll just say that what John's laid out is very much the starting point for how the Defense Department then took that national level view and sought to apply it and the priority on quantum inside the Defense Department. So that began with identifying quantum science as one of our priority technology areas. We did that in a very public way. It's still up on the DoD website that way. And we do that for two reasons. First, because it's an internal signal. So doing that early on helped to focus internal resources of the Department of Defense toward quantum over other potential areas. And again, it sat alongside some other AI being notable in their areas. And quantum science was pulled out directly, but obviously it has applications across many other intersectional areas, materials, AI, I've already mentioned, biology, et cetera. So it was not only a way to flag the importance of research on quantum science, but also to think about its applications in lots of different areas that are important to the Defense Department. So that's the internal piece, driving our budget. It also is an incredibly important signal to the community that supports defense research and also procurement and what we pursue. So we're sending a market signal. Now, our market is usually, for most things, and in quantum certainly the case, smaller than the commercial market. But that signal does have effect, particularly for those who are going to focus, let's say, research papers on national security topics at the intersection of quantum. So that's kind of how we approached it. We put a big investment there. I can't speak specifically to the dollar levels, but I'll just say it's in the billions that the Defense Department spends in this space. And the most recent, under the Trump administration, the reconciliation bill that just passed has a specific call out of $250 million for DARPA to continue benchmarking work that they've been working on in order to see how commercial companies can scale compute. So we looked at, of course, both the opportunities and threats. We have an advantage at this point on compute in particular. It's not here right now, but we have world-class everything that John pointed out. And so from the Defense Department perspective, we can see lots of ways to apply that. I can talk about some of those in Q&A here, or we'll expand upon that tomorrow. We also have a lot of concerns about, in particular, our cryptographic systems and making sure we can protect our data. If someone other than the US were able to have quantum capabilities that really were able to break that cryptography, that creates significant challenges for us. So there's also significant investment from the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and others in protecting having quantum resistant capabilities. So those are other areas that we put money into. And then I'll just mention in passing quantum sensing, which is more immediate, available today, closer to commercialization. And we see applications for quantum sensing for things like specific ability to detect, let's say, submarines, other capabilities along those lines that can get into more immediate application.
That's fascinating. We're going to come back to that also. But let's introduce Sebastian. First off, it's pretty impressive that Denmark established a tech ambassador. And you spent time in Silicon Valley. I don't think we see a lot of ambassadorships in Silicon Valley. And you were chief strategy advisor to Denmark's tech ambassador. Now you're in Toronto as the North American quantum diplomat. And as you said, equidistant, Chicago, New York, Toronto. So how, in this diplomatic role, how are you approaching quantum and quantum technology?
Well, thank you so much for the question, and thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here in Chicago. What a beautiful town you've got. I would say that we start with the assumption that technology isn't just this neutral thing. The whole reason we have a tech ambassador is that technologies have been a main driver, not just of geopolitical change, but of societal change in our lifetimes. The invention of the nuclear bomb, which is a technology has largely been the deciding factor in the international security political landscape for 80 years. The advent of the internet has done more to change the lives of ordinary Danes or Americans than most political agreements have. And so we start with the assumption that technology is a driver of change, and it isn't neutral. It is built by someone with some aim, some purpose, and who builds it, where it's being built, what it's being driven towards, how it's being funded, that matters a lot. And so when we look at quantum technology specifically, we think, wouldn't it have been wonderful if in earlier technological waves we had gotten in early, made a broad partnership of nations that have similar interests and are aligned and are close collaborators and are close partners to say, how can we best foster this technology into the world in a way that, to go back to Matt's point from the earlier panel, that it serves everyone, and that it's a technology that is developed with the most possible upside and the least possible downside. Really try to mitigate the real security challenges that come with quantum technologies early on. The US we can talk about that later. The US is doing a lot here in terms of making standards for post-quantum cryptography, for example. That's wonderful. But also, how can we maximize the benefits? And as a partner to the United States, Denmark comes with a lot on the table when it comes to quantum technologies. One of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, of quantum physics, was the Danish physicist Niels Bohr. He won the Nobel Prize for his work. He founded the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. And so for 100 years, we've had research into quantum physics in Denmark. We also have strong photonics researchers and all sorts of other stuff. And within the past 3 to 4 years, the Danish government has really put its money where its mouth is and invested a lot of money into the quantum ecosystem in Copenhagen, including having my position even exist. Like, how many countries have a quantum diplomat posted in other countries? Like, I think we're walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
That's excellent. All right, Ivo, let's have you wrap up the introductions by taking your perspective, your decades in foreign policy and international affairs, and tell us what you see as the most pressing issues when it comes to quantum technology and, you know, this race that we're in, this very critical race.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And let me just build on what the other three have said, because I think we are in one of the most important races for technology that we have ever been in our lifetimes. Certainly in our lifetimes. Yes, we had a race like this with regard to the atomic bomb. It was a very deliberate race. It was, in many ways, atomic energy, nuclear energy, and quantum developed in very similar ways, which is to say, scientific breakthroughs by brilliant individuals who came up with new ideas about how to create something. And then the question is, are we going to do the same thing as we did with nuclear technology when it comes to quantum, or are we going to do it differently and let 1,000 flowers bloom? Because what we did with nuclear technology, when we understood that there was a point at which who got the bomb first mattered. Now, we were in the middle of a war with a regime that had committed extraordinarily atrocities. And so worrying about that regime getting the bomb before we did was a real motivating factor. Quantum is not going to be the same. The benefits are vastly superior to the benefits on the nuclear side, certainly, but the negatives may well be the same. And that's why it matters. It matters who gets that technology, understands it better, and not that you're going to be able to deny it to others, but to having it before and understanding it before others do is important. And that requires two things. And that's why I like to call this the Manhattan Project for Quantum, to think about it. The number one thing it requires is an understanding between three communities: the government, the private sector, and the scientific community, to work together towards a common end, which in this case is the development of the understanding and the development of quantum technology as fast and as quickly as possibly as you can. And in some ways, what's happening here in Illinois is a nucleus of this. The second thing, which is also true on the nuclear side, is international cooperation. We would, in the United States, not have been able to do the Manhattan bomb, the Manhattan Project, with an Italian, Enrico Fermi, who created the first nuclear chain reaction just a few miles down the road in Chicago, Niels Bohr, Einstein, and others. This was an internationally scientific enterprise. And so for us to figure out how can we harness the international cooperation that's necessary for us to succeed is absolutely critical, and which is why in the Biden administration, and John can talk more about this, there was this very concerted effort to work together with like-minded countries on the technology development and on the understanding of how government can not only foster the technology development, but also can regulate and make sure that the good happens quickly and the bad is controlled, to do that in a cooperative fashion. That's what is attractive about, or interesting about this issue. Very different than almost any other technology issue, including AI and the social media that we've seen, or even the internet, because the consequences of its development, as we've heard, are so vast and remind, I think, people like me of the nuclear age in the 1930s and early 1940s.
So Ivo, I think it's interesting this understanding between government, science, and the private sector. And one of the key pieces that we're understanding is education. And I think about our Governor Pritzker, who was just here, and he has, great facility in being able to discuss, complicated topics around quantum. I was at the Quantum Exchange, I think last year. We had Senator Duckworth was there. So we have, some governmental leaders here in Illinois that understand it. But how do we broaden the aperture? And I'm going to ask Sebastian to weigh in on this also, to educate the political leaders and the private sector on these complicated and critical scientific issues. How should we think about that?
So this is what this conference is about.
Yeah.
In a very fundamental way, when a number of us started talking about thinking through can we have a conversation that is not just scientific, that is not just where's the quantum science going? A lot of that is happening, but what's the implication from a policy perspective? And can we bring CEOs, and can we bring top government leaders, as well as scientists, all together for a detailed conversation like we're having here today over the next 2 days to begin that conversation? Hopefully out of that, we will have greater networks of people who all of a sudden discover that they have been either thinking about parts of the problem that is part of a future solution, or indeed go away and say, I had no idea this was happening. I now need to start thinking about it. And so I hope that this is the beginning not only of an annual conversation, but of a deeper conversation that really starts thinking about how do you bring these disparate communities together. And one of the great things about Chicago, which is unlike so many other cities in the world, not a one industry or a two industry town, it's a 100 industry town. That's what Chicago does naturally, bringing these communities together, and that's why I think it's so important that this thing is happening here today on this set of issues.
And Sebastian, you said that was a key part of your role, bringing business, governments, academia together. How do you approach it? How should we be thinking about it from your perspective?
Well, like to Ivo's point, yeah, the best minds are going to be developing this technology, whether they're sitting in Germany or sitting in the U.S. somewhere or in Denmark. And I think as many students as we can get to co-work together, get PhDs crossing back and forth, get research group connected across what we could call the Western Alliance, or across a community of nations that has free and open societies and view the development of this technology in a like-minded way, the better. And that work is going on. There's several multilateral groups, multilateral forums where quantum is the main driver, where nations such as the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, many European countries are collaborating. And then we also need to invest, I think that was a point of the earlier panel too, we need to invest in just basic education from skilled labor to master's students and PhD students. In Denmark, we're educating right now the highest number of quantum graduates per capita. We are a small country. Per capita numbers can be easy to get up, but still, I think it speaks to. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, but we're making new quantum-specific master's programs in our university almost every year within different specific fields of the quantum value chain. And I think that that's the kind of commitment you need to see from government to kind of to get the critical mass of people that know what this is and can develop this technology together.
And John and Kathleen, there were two interrelated pieces that you both raised. And John, you mentioned, the competition and talked a little bit about the way that China approaches from a tops down. And, we see it in other industries, that the government very successfully decides that there's an application of a technology that they want broadened. Kathleen, you talked about the fact that in the Defense Department, that's the way that you're thinking about it, is what are these defense applications? So can you each comment on how we, from I'm going to call it a Western government perspective, compete against kind of this tops down, and what are the pros and cons of each side? So
yeah, look, I think John said it really well, which is I believe in our potential more than I believe in their potential. We have an innovation ecosystem that should be second to none. We have allies and partners. The Danes are an excellent example all over the world who want to work with us. We have a free and open society, free minds, freedom of expression and of research. If we can realize that, if we can invest appropriately, if we can tap into the demographic advantages that we have, both, if you will, here in the United States, but also through our smart immigration policies, it's hard to beat that. And we've shown that generation over generation. We are really challenged right now in those areas, as John pointed out. There's some that I think are humming along very, very well. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around the private sector in particular. That's great. I mean, that's got to be a necessary piece of it. But you have to have public policy around that supports it. And I think that's an area of concern, particularly for research universities and others.
Maybe just to go one level more detailed in talking about the stakes, because I think we've all sort of alluded to what's at stake here, but maybe just worth making it a bit more explicit. Because in addition to the competition between and among nations, there's another kind of race going on at the same time, which is sort of a race between the offensive side of quantum, the development of the computer, and the defensive, what I think of at least as the defensive side of this problem set, which is post-quantum cryptography and the other defensive mechanisms that countries are going to use against a quantum computer that countries will try to use against us. And so that race, the reason that race is important is, I won't scandalize, I don't think, anybody here by telling you, governments collect secrets from other governments. Our government may do that. Other governments certainly do that to us. And some of those secrets, not the Danes, everybody but the Danes.
Give us your phone. No.
I can only say it because I'm out of government. It's okay. And some of those secrets we can read in real time the minute we get them. And some of those secrets are encrypted, and we don't know when we're going to be able to read them. But the big reason why there's a first mover advantage that Ivo described is because the first country that gets access to a quantum computer, an actual usable crypto analytically relevant quantum computer, will be able to read the secrets of other countries that they've been collecting for years. And the advantage that will give is enormous, and I won't go through all the implications of it, but that's what we're most worried about. And two concerns I have, having laid out all the ways in which I think the United States is advantaged, both on the offensive side and I think the defensive side. One is our federal government has historically been probably the greatest repository of technical capacity and technical talent in the world. Not every single person in every single field is the very top of their field, but when you look at the breadth and depth that is available to policymakers, it's incredible. Whenever there is a new problem that we have never heard of, within 20 minutes, you can get somebody on the phone who has been studying that problem for 20 or 30 years and has a kind of world-class mindset to try to get you the information you need to make decisions. Because, as facile as we can be in talking about these things, none of us up here, I think, has the sort of technical background that's required to be a deep expert. I worry about the fact that that advantage for the United States is eroding the more civil servants and technical experts are walking out the door, either because they choose to leave or because they are pushed. That will hurt us on the offensive side of this problem. On the defensive side, and Kath actually is the one who really should speak to this because she's really been effective at wrestling with this problem, we are sometimes very good at developing technologies and then very slow to adopt them as a government. And the adoption costs and the barriers to adoption can be extremely high. Bureaucratic challenges can be extremely cumbersome. And so one of the things I worry about is that we win the race, but ultimately lose the overall competition because we are too slow to get this stuff actually implemented.
So as a follow-on, what should we be doing differently to address that second concern?
That's a better question for you.
Well, on technology adoption, look, I think this is just last week at the Aspen Security Forum, Kent Walker from Google spoke to this. So the following is, paraphrasing his point on tech diffusion, which is, just what John said, which is we have a history in the United States of creating new tech. You can think of the microelectronics. You can think about, all kinds of different techs that then other countries were superior, or industries in other countries were superior at then taking that research and the design work in the US and scaling it. So the scaling piece is a huge challenge on compute for quantum. That is where a lot of the energy is, both within the US government, the Defense Department specifically. I mentioned the DARPA example on the quantum benchmarking initiative. And of course, in the private sector is how do we actually scale this? And then once we are able to do that, have the capability to do that, how do we make sure we take best advantage of it rather than take our eye off the ball, essentially, and to use John's example of the many ways in which the federal government might take its eye off the ball by not having the right people in place who can help execute effectively, but also more generally not having the right public policy and regulatory policy in place, and then this drifts away. So I think that's a big concern. And Jennifer, if I can, I just want to mention one item unrelated to that, but related to something you asked before about relative advantage, and just in a defense-specific sense. There really is, at the intersection in particular of AI and quantum, an inherent US advantage over, say, China or other state-controlled countries, where the way in which they operate their military is super centralized. What we do in the United States and what Western governments in general do with their militaries is we train day in, day out, so that the effective level is at the lowest possible echelon, the lowest level. So there's a lot of individual esprit, a lot of individual momentum, and AI and quantum together bring what we call decision advantage faster, right? That would do that for any military, but it's going to preference militaries that have that decision power down at a lower level. So there is an inherent advantage to us being able to tackle quantum and AI quickly, and I think it could make a big difference in terms of Western military capability.
That's fascinating. And Sebastian?
Yeah, just to kind of share a little bit of how diplomatically we go about ensuring that we do that in partnership is Denmark has been doing a lot of leading within NATO to ensure that the NATO alliance kind of becomes a leader when it comes to in-housing, uptaking, and thinking about quantum technologies, both offensively and defensively. So one thing we did was we set up an accelerator housed at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, a NATO accelerator. It's under the NATO program called Diana, which is how a lot of new tech is being uptaken into the alliance. And so quantum companies, small startups sometimes, come from all over the NATO alliance to Copenhagen to see how their solutions are relevant to the collective military capabilities of NATO, which is a wonderful thing. Secondarily, Denmark has been the first chair of what's called the Transatlantic Quantum Community within NATO. Again, a mechanism to try to get NATO countries on the same page in terms of what are the most immediate challenges, how should we think about them, where should we direct our funding, which technologies are more offensive, which one are more defensive. All these big questions, we need to have some systems in place for how to think about them and how to get those technologies into our capabilities. And so that's one area where we've been doing a lot of work, especially with the US.
Ivo, I can tell you want to chime in.
So I want to actually get back to this, to your question to John and Kath about the race, and just put two asterisks, although I completely agree with all the things that have been said, just two asterisks. One is not only the question of what happens to the civil servants and its ability to to generate the knowledge necessary for a government to react swiftly enough. We have developed over the last 80 years an ecosystem of how to do technology advantage. And that ecosystem is a combination of private enterprise and encouraging through the market to encourage as much innovation as possible, and research funding by the federal government to research universities. And that funding is what has transformed the American university from a college, a place you teach students the knowledge that already exists, to a research university that actually innovates and often innovates at a more rapid scale than the market possibly can do. And that system right now is, I will put it mildly, being stressed. And if we destroy the system or we weaken the system, we will have great places to teach people what we know, but no longer great places to learn what we don't know. And so that's part of your innovation ecosystem. The second, it has to do with this top-down versus sort of bottom-up. And I think John and Kath put we are really good at developing the technology, but really bad at applying it. The Chinese are really good at stealing the technology we develop and then applying it, because they have a top-down approach. So if you look at AI and its integration into actual products, China's way ahead of us. Not that their AI is any better than ours, but their ability to take that technology, apply it into the business and or societal aspects is better. I worry that the same will happen on quantum. And so I think the point that Kath and John have made about how do you make sure not only that you innovate, but then take the innovation and apply it in the maximally fast and effective way is absolutely critical. And to be frank, we may have solved the first problem, we really have never really solved the second problem as well as we could.
So it was great. So we just have a few short minutes left, and I'm going to wrap up extending your comments, Ivo. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That's what our fellow Midwesterner, Mark Twain, once said. And you're making the connection, the history of technology evolution, AI into quantum. So lightning round, what have we learned from AI in real time that we should apply to improve the ways in which we move forward with quantum?
Want me to start?
John?
Yeah, so honestly, I think the most important thing is the interplay of the public and private sector. And if anything, in quantum, the public sector is going to have an even greater role than in AI. In AI, most of the core research and breakthroughs are coming out of the private sector, will be hopefully adopted rapidly by the private sector. On quantum, there is much more of a, I would say, a back and forth between the two and a collaboration between the two that's going to be necessary. And it's going to be just essential that we get that right if we are going to win these races that we've been describing. And I'll just give one other dimension of this rapidly, which is in the United States, much, if not most, if not the vast majority of our critical infrastructure is actually held in the private sector. Not like that in many countries around the world, certainly not like that in China, which goes to another advantage and a challenge. An advantage is we have this open, vibrant, dynamic, innovative community. A disadvantage is if the federal government sees a big risk and the private sector is maybe the biggest, what we call attack surface for that risk, we cannot direct them without legislation what they need to do to protect themselves. And that is going to be a very big issue when it comes to quantum. The most vulnerable systems certainly are the federal government systems when it comes to classified information, but all of this other critical infrastructure mostly is going to be the responsibility of the private sector to get up to speed. And we can recommend, we can advise, but we can't mandate.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is the first, they're going to have two. The first one is really around the ability to move a big area of technology if you can galvanize all sectors, if you will. And so to John's point, that's public-private, but also across the federal government. It's sort of honing and laser focusing all the different organizations that contribute. And certainly John at the NSC ran a lot of that. We have an Office of Science and Technology policy out of the White House that can really help with that. But trying to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. I think the second thing I would say is a little more kind of in the regrets category, which is the policy often lags the technology. That's not unusual. It is, however, problematic. So I think if we can make sure the international cooperation piece, for example, the standard setting, even on quantum, on cryptographic issues, the US and partner countries take different approaches. It's not entirely clear we'll all be able to operate together, for example, in crises if we're using different approaches. So getting those policy frameworks, getting the international engagement up and running before we realize in particular 2030 or after we believe quantum computing at scale, I think that would be well worth the time.
Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. I would hope that we've learned that once the technology is developed, the cat's out of the bag. And to Ivo's point, it's going to be deployed elsewhere. It's going to be played with. And you see AI right now, like, I don't know, my hotel room probably has AI in it right now. And it's just, so I hope that we've learned that once the technology is developed, it's going to be out in the world. And so let's get this one right as it is still being developed, as it is still maturing. Let's make sure we have knowledge of and control over the value chains. Let's make sure we develop this technology, that we design it from the start. You've heard of privacy by design when it comes to the internet technologies. Let's do some security by design when it comes to quantum technologies. Let's try to do as much as we can now, because once we have a utility scale quantum computer, the cat's going to be out of the bag.
Ivo, last thoughts.
So completely comparable to everyone else. I think if you look at the internet, AI, and quantum, there's an evolution from believing that the development of technology is by definition a positive and has no negative externalities, to an understanding, which is the social media and internet was always seen as opening up societies. Bill Clinton would talk about China trying to control the internet, and he compared it to nailing Jell-O to a wall, which was great at the time. It turned out to be fundamentally wrong. The Chinese were able to control the internet. AI, we're a little better. On quantum, we better understand before we get there that there are negative externalities of that technology. And if we don't control it before it happens, it'll be too late, which in my view is already the case with social media. And it's the case with AI too. And we have an opportunity, and this is just, I think, the general conclusion of all of us, of government to be in there before you get to that point and hopefully prevent the worst while maximizing the best.
Well, thank you all. I think this was a very enlightening discussion on the role of diplomacy and quantum, and I could have spoken with you all for hours. So our time is up, but this was terrific. Please give the panel a wonderful hand.
Thank you.